There is a grave at Arlington National Cemetery that the federal government will not let anyone open. Section 31, Grave 472. White marble headstone, rounded top, same as every other marker in that row. A visitor walking past it would have no idea. There is no warning sign, no fence, no designation that sets it apart from the hundreds of thousands of graves around it. But the cemetery keeps a file on this one, and the file does not read like a service record. It reads like a hazard notice. The language is, victim of nuclear accident. Body is contaminated with long-life radioactive isotopes. Under no circumstance will the body be removed from this location without prior approval of the Atomic Energy Commission in consultation with this headquarters. Under no circumstance. The man buried there is Army Specialist 4 Richard Leroy McKinley. He was 27 years old when he died on January 3, 1961, in what remains the only fatal nuclear reactor accident in American history. By the time the government figured out what to do with his remains, the death care industry had run out of options. They could not embalm him. They could not cremate him. They could not even wash his body without endangering the people in the room. So they built him a different kind of grave. Lead-lined casket, concrete encasement, metal vault, another foot of concrete poured on top, buried 10 feet down. His family watched the 8-minute funeral from 20 feet away. 65 years later, that grave is still faintly radioactive, and Richard McKinley cannot be moved. Richard McKinley was born in Union City, Indiana, and grew up in Kenton, Ohio. He enlisted in the Air Force in 1951, served in Korea, came home, married a woman named Carolyn Dick, and had 2 kids. By the late 1950s, he had joined the Army and trained as a nuclear power plant operator, a job that did not really exist in the civilian world yet. His assignment was the National Reactor Testing Station, 40 miles west of Idaho Falls in the Idaho desert. The Army was trying to solve a real problem. Their early warning radar stations near the Arctic needed constant diesel resupply runs across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. A compact nuclear reactor that could power those stations indefinitely seemed like the answer. SL-1 was the prototype. The bet was that if it worked, they would never have to run another fuel convoy to the Arctic again. It had been running since 1958. By late 1960, it was not running well. Control rods were sticking. The crew rotations were young, their combined experience thin. Later investigations would find the oversight had been inadequate for years, that people had known things were wrong and had not moved fast enough to fix them. On December 23rd, the reactor was shut down for Christmas. The central control rod was fully inserted and disconnected from its drive mechanism. Standard procedure. 3 weeks later, on the night of January 3rd, 3 men came in to reconnect it and start the reactor back up. Army Specialist Jack Burns was assigned to the reactor head. Navy electrician Richard Legg was supervising. Ann McKinley was nearby, handling secondary work, not the one touching the reactor, not the one giving the orders. None of them made it out. The job that night was simple on paper. To restart the reactor, someone had to manually lift the central control rod a few inches, just enough to reconnect it. 4 inches of movement, roughly. A routine step. At 9:01 in the evening, the alarms went off. Burns had pulled the rod. Not 4 inches, closer to 20. Nobody knows exactly why. The official investigation could not settle on an answer. The most charitable explanation is that the rod had been sticking, and when it finally broke free, he pulled too hard. A leaked memo from inside the Atomic Energy Commission suggested something darker, that Burns did it deliberately, that his marriage was falling apart, that there had been a phone call from his wife earlier that evening asking for a divorce, and that Legg may have been involved. That theory was never proven. It has never been disproven either. What is known is what happened in the 4 milliseconds after the rod moved. The reactor surged to roughly 20,000 megawatts, more than 6,000 times its rated capacity. The water inside flashed to steam. The explosion tore through the building. Legg was found pinned to the ceiling by a control rod driven through his body. It took 6 days and a crane rig, with workers rotating in shifts of 65 seconds each because of the radiation, to bring him down. Burns died in the blast. McKinley was found alive on the floor, badly injured. He died in the ambulance. And then came a problem nobody had a procedure for. All 3 bodies were so contaminated with radioactive isotopes, cesium-137 and cobalt-60, that the normal rituals of death were simply off the table. You could not wash the bodies without endangering whoever was doing the washing. You could not embalm them. The process requires hours of direct contact, and the fluid coming back out would have been contaminated. Cremation was out entirely. Burning a radioactive body releases what is inside it into the air. The pathologist brought in to handle the autopsies had to work in short-timed rotations. The most contaminated tissue from all 3 men was surgically removed and buried separately in the Idaho desert as nuclear waste. What remained of each man was placed in a lead-lined casket, encased in concrete, set inside a metal vault. The funeral industry had no framework for any of this. There is no line on a general price list for nuclear containment burial. No embalmer is trained for it. The government handled it because there was no one else. 22 days after the accident, an Air Force cargo plane landed at Bolling Air Force Base in Washington before dawn. McKinley's vault was loaded onto a flatbed truck and driven to Arlington. The funeral lasted 8 minutes. His wife Caroline and their 2 children watched from 20 feet away, the minimum distance the Army had determined was safe. There was no reception after, no gathering. The vault went into the ground. Double lead-lined casket, concrete encasement, metal vault, 10 feet deep, an extra foot of concrete poured on top. Then, a standard white marble headstone, rounded top, the same as every other marker in Section 31. That was January 25, 1961. The file the cemetery keeps on grave 472 has not changed since. It still says what it said then. Victim of nuclear accident. Body contaminated with long-life radioactive isotopes. Under no circumstance will the body be removed without prior approval of the Atomic Energy Commission. The Atomic Energy Commission does not exist anymore. It was dissolved in 1974 and replaced by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The restriction transferred with it. McKinley's family cannot petition to move him the way any other family could. A court order is not enough. The grave sits outside the normal legal framework that governs every other burial on American soil, and it has stayed there for 65 years, with no sign of that changing. The isotopes in that grave are still decaying. Cesium-137, one of the main contaminants in his body, will not fully break down for roughly 300 years. Cobalt-60 takes longer. The levels have dropped significantly since 1961, but they are nowhere near zero, and they will not be in your lifetime or your children's. You can visit the grave. You can walk right up to it, read the name, take a photo. The radiation at the surface is not dangerous. It is the opening that is off limits. Richard McKinley went to Idaho to help power a radar station. He never came home, and the government made sure, in the most permanent way it knew how, that he never would. This is Funeral Report. We cover the death care industry, the pricing, the practices, and the cases where the system hits a wall it was not built for. If you are new here, there is a full library on the channel. Subscribe so you do not miss what is next.